Hello everyone, thank you for the invitation. And before I start going into the case of the Sentient crime scene case, I will just begin for a few minutes to explain who we are and what we do, because I think it might be useful to give some context to understand the work. So I work at Forensic Architecture. I'm the deputy director there. Forensic Architecture is a research agency. We are a team of about 15 people who are architects, but also artists, journalists, filmmakers, programmers, scientists, theorists, etc. And what we do is spatial and media analysis for human rights cases. So we might work with different NGOs, with different human rights groups, and we would work on particular cases and create a case file, do the spatial analysis that is required to present the case as evidence. So we would do the spatial analysis that would become later evidence either in court or in different legal and political forums. So we have worked with the UN before. We have presented our cases in different national courts, to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and then of course we do cases for advocacy and for just for media or for exhibitions, etc., etc. So the way that we work is always because also we are a research agency. We always develop new evidentiary techniques. This is our mandate, to create and disseminate new evidentiary techniques. And so part of what we do is somehow comes from the necessity to look at urban warfare or conflict in a different light, exactly because we kind of, at this moment, we find ourselves in a slightly different or kind of we have to readjust to our current media scene. So, for example, the simple answer to why architecture is relevant to forensics to begin with is the fact that most contemporary warfare is now urban. So when we look at war that happens in cities, when buildings are mostly the places where people die these days, architects, urbanists, spatial practitioners are best suited to understand what has happened within a conflict. So we on a first degree, we might read a building, we might read ruins, and try to figure out what happened in that day. So try to see if it was an airdrop bomb or a tank fire. Then if we don't have access to the site, if we can't go to places like Gaza or Syria, where we're not given access to those places, then we might have to depend on the media that comes out of it. So we might have to depend on images, videos, images that come from social media, that come from people while fleeing the bombing. They might turn around and take pictures and videos of their own bombardment. And so this is a condition that we find that is quite new because of the proliferation of cheap media through mobile phones, through social media, etc. And so what we do in these cases is figure out ways through which we can compose, collect, and compose the story of what happened during those events based on the available media, based on the available sources. And we might combine images with witness testimony, and other data such as satellite imagery, etc., etc. So we always do our analytics in order to support human rights cases. We never work for governments directly, we never work for militaries. We always work with civil society groups, with the affected communities, in order to look back at state violence and help kind of raise the voices that are usually silenced. And so there's multiple kind of techniques that we use as part of kind of our portfolio. Every case kind of demands something else, but this is kind of to give you a general understanding of how we work, and then based on that, I think you can understand a little bit more this case, which is actually not warfare, but a homicide case. So I think without any longer introduction, I could begin with the case of the 77 square meters, 26 minutes, which is this. So on the 6th of April of 2006, Jan Halit Yozgat, a German citizen from a Turkish background, was murdered in his neighborhood, in the internet cafe that he ran with his family. His family owned it, in Kassel in Germany. So his was the 9th out of 10 murders that were all made with the same weapon, a silenced Czeska 83. And they were the 10 murders happened from 2000 to 2007 across different cities in Germany. And although those murders happened at the same, in the exactly the same style, same weapon, always targeting people from migrant communities that were running small, successful businesses. So always on the street level, it was either an internet cafe or a flower shop or a cake shop, etc. And although those form part of a series, the German authorities were not realizing that those are actually murders that are happening for a racist motive. Instead, what they thought was happening was that there was some sort of conflict between Turkish mafia in Germany, and actually attributed the murders to that. They called the murders doner kebab murders, which is racist to begin with. So instead of questioning who would want to target those people, they started suspecting the families of the victims. They started interrogating them, harassing them even, by asking whether there were any affairs within the family, whether there was any conflict between brothers and sister spouses, etc., etc. And so in this way, they kind of perpetuated the violence that was inflicted to begin with. After the murder of Khalid, a month later, there was this demonstration in both. There was a demonstration in both Kassel and Dortmund, where the other murder took place. Another murder took place, and the demonstration was basically coming from the Turkish community itself, which had realized that these were a series of racist murders. They realized that they're being targeted, and they went out to the streets and demanded that the German authorities actually reveal or look into those events and acknowledge the fact that the Turkish community has been targeted. After this, so this is 2006. In 2011, I believe it, yeah, I think it's in 2011, there was this one video that came out, Pink Panther video, where a group called NSU, National Socialist Underground, took responsibility for the murders. So even though there were 10 murders with the same weapon, the Turkish authorities had realized nothing until the very perpetrators, the NSU, came out and said it was us all along who were conducting those murders. And that was following the circumstances of those 3 people. These are allegedly the only 3 NSU members. They're definitely the core. So during that time, 2 of them, Uwe Mondlos and Uwe Bonhart, committed suicide, and the 3rd one, the only remaining member of the core of the NSU, Beate Zschäpe, fled. She's the one who sent out the video, put their house on fire, and fled. A few weeks later, she handed herself in, and she's currently facing trial in Munich. The trial is just about to come to an end. So, why are we kind of focusing on this investigation? As part of part of the crime scene, within the crime scene, there were 6 witnesses. One of them was Andreas Temme, the man you see over here, who was a Secret Service agent for the state of Hessen. He was a Secret Service agent in an agency called Verfassungsschutz, which is basically an agency that is supposed to look out for right-wing violence. So he was present at the internet cafe at the time of the murder, but he failed to come forward when the police asked for witnesses. Later, he was found out through his internet login data, so he had logged into a sex chat site as Wildman70, and so he was brought forward and asked whether he was present. He finally admitted that he was there, and he said he was embarrassed to say so to begin with because his pregnant wife was at home and he didn't want her to know that he was in an internet cafe chatting with other women. So we came in as an agency in 2000 and I believe it was 2015 or 16, after there was a leak on the internet from a right-wing group called NSU Leaks. So they had access to many court documents, and they released all of those documents to them. They released the documents on their blog. And so within those documents we would find things like witness testimonies, we would find things like the data set that was kind of describing when each and every one of the witnesses had logged into a computer or was on the phone, and other documents about the kind of 10 NSU murders. So we were commissioned not by any kind of government organization or agency, but actually from a people's tribunal. So following the kind of the demonstration, the No 10th Victim was what the demonstration was called after Khalid's murder. Following that demonstration that I showed you to begin with, there were a series of initiatives that sprang up in Germany. Initiatives such as Antifa or other initiatives such as the 6th of April initiative, and other local groups that started advocating in a local basis for the kind of clarification of the NSU murders. And after a while, those initiatives formed a coalition, and they decided to do a people's tribunal because they were not happy with the way that the trial was taking place. So the trial in Munich, that is kind of trying the responsibility, or if Beate Zschäpe is guilty or not, her and another 5 people who helped her, is focusing only on her role in the murders, and is actually not asking any questions about state involvement or state responsibility or their failure to realize that these are a series of murders that took place across almost 10 years, and there was a racist motive. So the People's Tribunal that was formulated out of those civil society groups decided to do a 3-day event to kind of re-examine the facts in order to open up the political conversation. And so they invited us to look at the available material that was leaked and to figure out what we can extrapolate for the relationship of the state with those murders. So again, we focused on the murder of Khalid because it was the only one where you have one state representative present at the crime scene, and he claims that he has noticed nothing. So this is the way that through this one event, we decided to focus on this one murder, because through this one event we can start asking larger questions. How much did the state know? Why was he there? Why was he there, and why does he claim he didn't notice anything, even though he was on the phone with an informant of his, of the right-wing, the far-right scene, only a few hours earlier? How is it possible that someone who is trained to be a detective cannot hear a gunshot in a closed space, cannot see the body of the victim when he places a coin, and cannot smell the gunpowder, even though he claims that he's accustomed to handling guns. So part of the leaks, as part of kind of the leaked files, there was also this one video which became a really important artifact for us. This is Andreas Temme himself. This is the Secret Service agent who is demonstrating for the police how he could not have noticed the murder, and he's basically reenacting his visit to the internet cafe. This is the original internet cafe. It is now refurbished, so we can't have access to what it was before. So he shows how he logged out of his computer in PC2. He walked in front, tried to find Khalid, couldn't find him. He wasn't there. And because he couldn't find him, he looked outside, and then he decided to take a coin and place it on Khalid's desk and leave. So Khalid was murdered on that desk, and his body was laying just behind it. So this for us constitutes an original document. This for us constitutes his witness testimony. And the question that we are asking in this investigation is not who conducted the murders, but whether this man is lying with this particular video, with this reenactment. Is his reenactment true or is it false? Is he committing the act of perjury, lying in court, when he's illustrating that he has kind of he has moved through the shop and yet noticed nothing? So we began. So we began by reconstructing the internet cafe based on available images and on the video of Temme's reenactment. As I said, the internet cafe is no longer there. It is refurbished. It is now a B-shop. And so we began by using those images. This is exactly where Khalid was murdered. And we constructed a 3D model based on the available material. We did this in 3D, as well as, exactly because it's no longer there and we had to perform a series of experiments, we also constructed the same space as a one-to-one model. So we abstracted our digital model to the only relevant and important surfaces, and we reconstructed the crime scene as a one-to-one installation in the House of World Cultures in Berlin. And in order to do a series of experiments, so the way that we abstracted the model is we kept the surfaces that were important for things like sound. So we kind of used the same materials that we used, materials that were equivalent, that were specified by acoustic experts. So we used we used a particular material that would perform in the same way as a brick wall, for example. We kept glass panels because glass panels reflect sound in a particular way. And so we used the 3D model of the site as a sensory device, as a device that would be able to act and perform as a sensorium through which we can conduct a series of experiments that have to do with Andreas Temme's senses. Is it possible that he was there and he didn't notice anything? So before we even kind of started all of this, we began with a very simple task, and that is to figure out where everyone was during the murder. We did this because we had the data set, we had the login and logout data. So the blue circles is where all of the witnesses are, the yellow circle is where Andreas Temme is, and Khalid was murdered here in the front of the cafe. Now, since we have all of those data sets, we are able to plot this data on a timeline. This is interesting. Why? Because exactly it is an internet cafe, everyone is connected to a time recording device. So everyone is either on the phone or logged onto a computer. And that makes witness testimony much more precise, because usually people, when you ask people, did you hear something, they might say, yes, it was a bit after I came in. Was it half an hour? Was it 40 minutes? Who knows? But this time they would say things like, I heard a loud sound at the time when I was on the phone with my brother, and we know when that phone call was. So we know exactly how long, what that time frame was. Here you have two other witnesses who were logged in and playing Call of Duty, which ironically is a game where players shoot Nazis. And so you have the witnesses shooting Nazis in one room, and you have an actual neo-Nazi coming in to the next room and conducting one of the murders. So we plot this let's say, we kind of use this data set in order to create a timeline of events and to understand if it is possible that Andreas Temme could have missed the event. So based on his own login data, we know when he left, we know when he logged out, we know how long it took him, sorry, here we go. So we know when he logged out, and we know how long it took him to move from his seat to outside onto his car, based on the reenactment video that he made. So based on those scenarios, we have three possible scenarios. One, we question whether it is even possible that Andreas Temme was outside of the Internet Cafe when the murder took place. The second is, did the murder take place exactly at the time between his logout and his exit? So whether he was in the front room of the cafe, which would make him complicit to the murder as well, definitely a witness, and probably also an accomplice. And the third question is, if the murder took place at while he was still logged in, is it possible that he missed it? So very clearly, so very kind of simply, we start with kind of questioning the first scenario: is it possible that Temme was outside? So we use his reenactment again as his original testimony. We test whether, according to his own account, according to the language spoken by his own body, it is possible that whether he has enough time, whether there's enough time from the moment that he goes into his car until the moment where the last witness comes out and realizes that the murder took place. There's 39 seconds. So from the moment that Temme enters into his car and until the moment that the witness hangs up the phone and goes into the first room, there's 39 seconds. Within those 39 seconds, a series of very specific events have to take place. Khalid needs to return from wherever he would be, because Temme didn't see him there. This is another kind of question. This is another open question. How is it? Where would he go? No witness saw him outside. He had just gone to the bathroom. There's no one who could actually have. There's no explanation where he would have gone. But in any case, within those circumstances, we have to assume that Khalid is returning to the Internet Cafe, just missing Andreas Temme, who's entering into his car. Here we have Khalid, an actor playing Khalid in red. So he goes back, sits on his position, and exactly at this moment, the killer comes in, shoots twice, and leaves. So we use the 3D model, and we use the installation in this case to actually conduct a reenactment experiment to see if there's enough time. Immediately afterwards, the witness has to come out, and nothing else is noticed. So we realize that for all of those things to happen, they have to be so synchronized, they have to be so well aligned that they only leave 4 seconds in between. This is not possible in real world conditions. Not even is this not possible. There is a witness that actually completely disregards the scenario, because he says that when he heard the loud sounds, he was just inputting the PIN number on his phone call, and that is a completely different time. So we know that the first scenario, where Temme is supposedly outside of the Internet Cafe when the murder takes place, is completely false. So we question whether there's enough time. We question whether there's enough time for the second scenario to to take place, whether it is possible that he is in the front room, and we notice that, we know that according to the available, so the second scenario is just those few seconds before, from the moment that Teme logs out until the moment where this one witness, his phone call comes through. This is when the murder takes place. If, according to this scenario, according to this data, is it possible that the murder took place during that time? According to this data set, it is possible. So it is possible that he was an accomplice. But so later on, we realize that this is also disregarded. I will tell you about it later. Then we go to the third scenario, and this is the one where Andreas Teme is still logged in on his computer, on PC2, while the murder takes place. So this we have to, these circumstances demand us to ask 3 questions. Did he hear the gunshots? Did he smell the gunpowder? Did he see the body? He himself, in his testimony, says, "I did not perceive any smoke. I have neither smelled or seen anything. Concerning noises, I really cannot say anything." He said he's used to handling guns, and he's surprised that he couldn't notice anything. So we begin with sound, and we say, okay, we know what the gun was. So let's test this. Let's test the scenario. So we ask some weapons experts to find the same gun and shoot it. So they find the same gun, they go to Arizona where you can shoot anything, and they conduct a series of experiments where they shoot the gun and they record the sound.
The CC, no suppressor?
We then shoot the same, we shoot 3 more guns with the same caliber, and we see that these are the sound signatures are equivalent, and then we use a suppressor for one of them, and so we measure how much does the sound get suppressed with a wet suppressor. So we have Colt
32 with a wet suppressor.
So even with the sound suppressor, the sound reaches 130 decibels at minimum. So there's multiple measurements that it always reaches at least 130 decibels, which is really loud for anyone who has kind of an understanding of sound. We then use the sound signature inside our installation with an acoustic expert, and so we measure how.
Measurement 1, high-level gunshot. Start now. Measurement end. Measurement 2, gunshot. Start now. Measurement end.
So what we do here is basically figure out how much does the space attenuate sound, how much does the space keep sound in or suppresses it, and how much does it reflect it, and what is the difference? So what is the difference between the sound level at the moment of at the actual moment, place of shooting, in relation to the position of the witness? So how much does Teme actually hear? And so we figure out, also with a digital simulation with ray tracing techniques. Here we do the same process digitally, and here and in the second model we corroborate our physical results with the digital by doing a digital simulation of the physical experiment. And so we figure out that altogether it is 94 to 99 decibels, the sound level that would have reached Andreas Teme at that time. This means that for a split second, for a fraction of a second, the sound would have reached the level of the equivalent of kind of a concrete being drilled. If you can imagine, just so that you understand how loud that is. And so it is safe to assume and our acoustic experts' estimation is that it's safe to assume that he definitely heard it. In fact, the relation between the ambient sound and the actual gunshot there was such a big difference that he could have actually been woken up from sleep, even if he's absent-minded. This would have been an intense kind of moment. So then we continue with smell, and what we do here is again use our model in order to visualize the volume of gases that is produced by 2 gunshots of that particular ammunition. Here it is just visualizing, let's say, the smell cloud. That's a simplified version. We're working here with fluid dynamics experts, physicists, fluid dynamics experts from Imperial College, who are helping us with those calculations, and also who have designed, let's say, digitally, who have designed an algorithm that traces the movement of particles of ammonia that we are certain exist within a single bullet. The recipe of a bullet is secret, so we don't know exactly what is in there, but we know that ammonia would be one of the byproducts. And here, our fluid dynamics specialist is measuring the threshold of smell. So whatever is within this cloud would have been perceived by someone who would just be passing by under those particular conditions. So within a particular time frame, if it's basically if Teme had gotten up within the first 20 seconds of scenario 3, he would have definitely perceived the smell cloud. If he would have gotten up the latter 20 seconds, then we are not certain, because it's possible he couldn't have perceived it, but also we don't know what other elements are within the bullet, so there we cannot tell. But what you see here is also the way that what we are measuring is the way that the door opening and closing when the killer comes out creates a vortex that kind of that makes the smell cloud more homogeneous within the space. And at that moment, we can assume that, I think, safely assume that that within those conditions, Teme would have noticed it. So, lastly, and very simply, we want to test whether Teme could have seen the body. And to do this, we start by, first of all, understanding his cone of vision, understanding what he sees from his position. So we do again the experiment both digitally and, So we do this experiment both digitally and physically. We always try to corroborate with 2 different methods. And here we understand how, from his position at PC2, we are simulating basically his vision, again, coming from his own reenactment. So we're using his own reenactment to question whether, even by his own account, it is possible that he couldn't have seen the body. So we here try to figure out the micro movements of his head, the way that he turns his head. We notice also that even though he's looking for Khalid, who is supposed to be on the front desk, he never really looks at the front desk. He kind of avoids it. So we are simulating his vision. He looks out, can't find him. Moves back in, still doesn't look towards the desk. And then he takes the coin. And places it. Teme is almost 1.95 centimeters tall. The desk was 1.76 m, and so we used an actor who was wearing a camera at Teme's eye level. So we simulate that also in the kind of reality, we used also different positions, even though we got the position of the body from his father, who was the first one who discovered Khalid dead. We tried many different, we tried falling in every way possible to see if it's possible that the body was so concealed underneath the desk that Temel wouldn't have noticed. But all the kind of alterations that we tried, he was always extremely visible, and it's also kind of important to say that at some point when the actor, we hadn't told Stefanos was acting as Teme that we are going to use a real person behind the desk, so he himself was shocked the moment that he placed the coin. So that kind of wraps up our investigation, and we are able to say that according to our experiments that again we kind of conducted with a series of experts, we can be certain that scenario 1, where Andreas Teme had left the Internet Cafe, is not possible. At this time, it was still possible that he would be in the front of the cafe when the murder takes place, which means that he encounters the killer. And scenario 3, where Andreas Teme is sitting on the back of the Internet Cafe, means that he's definitely a witness, and yet he doesn't admit it. And so, what does this mean? So, at this point, I think it's important to kind of zoom out and kind of tell you a little bit also of the story of the project itself. So when we finished the investigation, of course, we did it as also a report, and we kind of this is the lifeline of the investigation, right? And this is what we call also a diagram of counterforensics. So, what does counterforensics mean? Forensics is usually something that the state undertakes in order to monitor the civilians. In our case, when we are investigating state involvement, we have to assume a civil society perspective. So we are returning the gaze, forensic gaze, back into the state. So we're performing counterforensics, which means that if we were working for governments, our process would be very simple. We would be commissioned by the prosecutor or by someone from the trial. So what you see here is a diagram that is arranged according to different forums. So we would be working with a legal forum, we would be working for the court, we would be commissioned, we would conduct our investigation, and we would present it on trial. But we don't have the luxury, or we don't like to assume this position at this time. So what this means is that we have to find a completely different way to operate as a research project and as an advocacy project and as a political project that requires us to create pressure for the political scene. So what you see here is the way that we move throughout the different forums, from the legal forum to the political forum to the civil society forums, cultural forums, media forums, etc. So this, I'm just going to go quickly through the diagram. So we start because a bunch of civil society organizations, initiatives, form a coalition and create the People's Tribunal, which is the kind of nod, what you see, all of those kind of lines kind of streamlined. So there's a lot of information here. I'm just going to guide you through some of the important ones. We get commissioned because there is a leak in 2016, right? So because of the leak, we start our investigation. The leak is on the media. So we use the media, we start our investigation. On parallel, there's different processes going on. The Munich trial, the different parliamentary inquiries. And at this one point, in November 2014, there is a document that is created by the Verfassungsschutz, the Secret Service Agency, that is basically investigating what is the, sorry, it's not created by the Secret Service Agency. There's a document that investigates the relationship between the Secret Service Agency and the murders. So the question of what is Teme doing at the Internet Cafe is being addressed, and there is this report that's being conducted, that at this point in November 2014 is closed off for 120 years. It is banned and it will not see public eyes for 120 years. 120 years is the longest ban the German government can place on any given document. So we are wondering why wouldn't they explain what has happened? Why wouldn't they explain the relationship between this particular secret service agency that is supposed to be monitoring far-right violence and those murders? So that locking of the file is something that happens within a political level, and it becomes also a reason why we start working. So from then onwards, we begin our investigation based on material that is available on online, on the public domain, and we take the help also of different cultural foundations, such as the House of World Cultures in Berlin, who commissions us, and we can build the one-to-one model. This is that kind of stream over there. Then when our preliminary results get finalized and we realize that Temme should have seen the body, Temme should have heard the gunshots, we do a press conference. And so this is the moment over there, the white kind of circle. Within the press conference, sorry, before that even, when we do the one-to-one installation, we also allow a few members of the press to see the installation and for a few parliamentarians also to come in and see the installation. It's important to say that the House of World Cultures is just on the other side of the street from the German Parliament. So it's quite a lucky coincidence. And so after that, with our preliminary results get presented in a press conference, and because of that press conference, and because there's added kind of political and media pressure, we get invited to present our evidence, our report, in the Munich trial. Now later on, in the Munich trial, there's a technical error that has to do with whether or not we are allowed to present, because there's a difference in opinion between the lawyers, and one of the lawyers gives us access to some of the court documents. So this is, you know, at this moment, it's important to say that we've conducted our whole investigation on material based on the public domain, and that was fine to present in court. And the moment that we're using actually official documents, we're not even using them, we just have access to them, we look at them, then we get discredited and we cannot go into trial. So it's an interesting kind of paradox, an oxymoron. At the same time, we're also get invited to submit a report for the parliamentary inquiry, the federal parliamentary inquiry that is happening. So within the parliament, there's a whole inquiry about the role of the NSU, the whole kind of political kind of complexity of the NSU. So we submit this report at the very end, before the parliamentary inquiry finishes. They added at the very end, they say they need a bit more time to investigate. Following this, we also get invited to present our work in Documenta. Documenta is, I don't know if you know, but it's one of the biggest art exhibitions in Germany of contemporary art. But the interesting thing is, it is in Kassel, so it's just a few hundred yards away from the original crime scene. We have already presented our final results at the People's Tribunal. We have already kind of presented what the case is about. And then in Kassel, we are basically install the video of the investigation and we present the report. And then there's an interesting moment that happens at this point, because again, because Documenta is so close to the crime scene, our collaborators from the People's Tribunal start using the space of the exhibition as a ground where they start bringing different journalists. They start bringing MPs. They brought a police detective that was working on the investigation, and they bring them into the exhibition space, and they start explaining our investigation through the exhibition space. So all of a sudden, you have a cultural foundation that takes a role of kind of takes an investigative role, or a role where there's public discourse about an ongoing investigation. So because there are also thousands of people who come into Documenta, thousands of Germans, but also an international audience, all of a sudden there's added political pressure. And all of a sudden, there's added pressure to address the investigation and address the role of Andreas Temme and his presence at the Internet Cafe on a different level. So at this point, we get invited, because of Documenta, the different MPs who are there invite us to present our evidence in the Hessian parliamentary inquiry, so in the parliamentary inquiry of the state of Hessen, which is more local. And so finally, our investigation, our video, gets presented, excuse me, in front of Andreas Temme, who is asked to respond, who is asked to give an answer. And so he says, well, this doesn't remind me of anything, but they seem to be using my image a lot. And do they have copyright to use my video? So that is his only defense. And so this is all to say that this complexity, this is what it takes to do an investigation that is countering the state, to do a counter-forensics investigation, to find ways to create political pressure and to enter into the different forums, to play at it, sometimes in advantage, sometimes not. Mostly not in advantage. So the main principle of let's say mainstream forensics is that at any moment that the police investigates us, they always have the upper hand. They are always able to cordon off the crime scene and to figure out what is happening inside. They have access, they have more technological means, they have they are able to perform their investigation in greater detail. And usually we, the civil society, stay outside of it and have to find different ways to enter into it and question whether the whole process is legitimate to begin with. That's why we have to work with leaked documents. That's why we have to work with let's say, other documents that come from social media, sometimes images, videos, etc. But what we do have an advantage also is that we are closer to the affected community that has a local knowledge, a situated knowledge that the police would never be listening close to. So this is, for us, this is the way that we are able to kind of find kind of a way in. And so just to say that at this moment, there's this back and forth. And at this last, the Hessian parliamentary inquiry, where Temme was presented with our investigation, basically there's an interesting moment that happens there. The day before the inquiry, the CDU, the Christian Democrats party in Germany, the one that Merkel is a part of also, presents to the parliamentary inquiry a counter-report. So they take our report and they analyze it line by line. And they start with saying, this is a bit inaccurate, this is not very clear. They take all our credentials, all our credits, and they analyze each and every one of our CVs. They say, this person's an artist. And so they begin in the parliamentary inquiry and they say, this is not a report you have to consider. This is just an artist group who's doing just art. Like, why would we listen in on this? But strangely, sorry, these are some of the invitation letters. This is the report. This is their counter report. But strangely, this report that they present is not signed. It doesn't have any author. So they present a counter report to a university-based scientific report where we have very clearly kind of explained what experts we used, what are the credentials, etc., etc., and they present a document that is unsigned to dismiss it, right? And so there's no way we can consider this as legitimate peer review. We're very used to peer review as, you know, doing work within a university, but this is something that has a different quality to it. What's interesting, though, is that we realize that they have a very good understanding of the case, so they are very close to the investigation, because they say, at some point, they say, the data sets that we're using is outdated. There's a new data set. There's a second police investigation that we haven't taken into account. And of course we haven't taken the second police investigation into account because it wasn't in the public domain. And so with their critique, they reveal the fact that there has been more information later on. So because they criticize us, we then are able to look back and try to figure out where this report is. We find it through some kind of local contacts. And then eventually we are able to say that according to the new data set, there's a second police report that was considering atomic time versus, I don't know what, the local computer time. And so according to the second data set, only the scenario where Andreas Temo was still logged onto his computer is possible. So the new data set by itself disregards the first two scenarios. So according to that data set, we have figured out that if he's logged in, he's definitely a witness. So then, in a way, it kind of verifies the report even further. So I'm kind of giving you this example because it's an interesting, this is how an investigation works in that context, when you're always trying to gain more access, you're always blocked off, and part of the critique becomes a way that was a big loss for us, this hurt a little, you know, the way that they criticized our document was a bit, you know, they took a stab at us, but at the same time, this is the way that it's messy, but it reveals information. So all of a sudden now, we're able to say that he's definitely a witness, and then the question is, what is his defense? Or what is not even his defense, because we don't care really about him. What is the defense of the Secret Service agency? Why would you have the world's worst Secret Service agent believe him and still employ him because he was still employed? There's something wrong about there. So all we're asking at this point is that we want this document that was banned for 120 years, we want this to be out in the open. We want to understand what has taken place, and we want to figure out the relationship of this Secret Service agency. And in the process, we have revealed that political parties such as the CDU are mostly trying to undermine investigations rather than aid them. And we figured out that at the time of the murder, the CDU was quite close to the Secret Service agency, so there's something there. So this is to say, you know, we kind of to wrap it up. The trial is now coming to an end. As part of the kind of closing statements, the lawyers of the family have asked that the prosecution considers our investigation. They haven't, and so even though the trial of Beate Zschäpe is closing, and even though Beate Zschäpe will most likely be deemed guilty, for us the case is not closed until we figure out the involvement of the police. So we use, just kind of to kind of wrap up, we use whatever available media, whatever material is available, media such as images, videos, reenactment videos. We reenact it, we reconstruct it, we reenact the reenactment, we reconstruct the crime scene, and we use all of those in order to figure out what traces are left within the space. How does the space itself act as a sensorium, and how could we understand the relationship between the witness and the event? So I think here I would like to leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, it depends on you if you are open to. I think if any of you have questions now, it would make sense to ask it now. So the question is whether you have questions to Christina now. Yes, please.
Can you tell me about the two guys playing Call of Duty in the internet shop?
Yeah.
I'm not very professional in this computer game stuff,
yeah.
But don't you have to install the game on the computer? And usually you're not allowed to install anything on computers in internet shops.
You're not allowed to start anything? What do you mean?
No, not install software.
Install. No, the Internet Cafe had. I don't know, but the Internet Cafe had those. It was that kind of Internet Cafe.
Yeah, they usually buy these games, and then people go for the purpose of playing them.
Yeah.
You cannot download a pirated copy and probably install it on the computer, but if they had it,
it was that kind of
What kind of data visualization tools you use for scientific data, like visualizing scientific data?
We usually, depends on the data. but usually we work with different experts. So here we work with an acoustic expert that visualized, they had their own ray tracing programs and visualized the sound. And for the fluid dynamics, we had again another physicist.
So you don't have an in-house like database guy because you have a lot of material like that?
We don't have anyone in-house because every case requires a different expert. What we do have is, you know, we are mostly architects and etc. etc. So what we have is tools such as 3D modeling software, animation software that is able to integrate all of those. We also have programmers who work in particular cases, but not on the physics level. They would work, for example, we had the case in Mexico about the 43 disappeared students of Ayotzinapa, and there we had hundreds of narratives. We had to data mine 2 huge reports, so thousands of pages of narrative, and so we had to data mine it into kind of data points. So where was each person at any given moment? So you had thousands of data points that then we had to visualize in order to figure out if a particular member of the police or the military was present at the same time as someone else. So that we do. We know how to. We always work with kind of analysis of space and time, and that we can do in-house. But when it comes to kind of the physics of it, the ballistics, we have to work with the weapons experts, because we can just kind of assume everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
With this NSU case, there were so many other things not right in different aspects. Did you also investigate other cases of the NSU, or was that the only one? That was the only one. So it was a decision when we first kind of were commissioned by the tribunal, we were asked to look at all of them and see what we can do. And we decided that it makes sense for us to focus on Khalid's case exactly because Temeh was there. And because within that, as we say, within those 77 square meters, you have a victim, you have the witnesses were all kind of members of the migrant community, the ones that were being terrorized by this. The whole point of the NSU was to create fear within those communities. And you had the the perpetrator, the neo-Nazi perpetrator, and you had a member of the police. So it had all of those elements. So the question is, through this one case, how could we, by kind of analyzing in great detail what happened there, how could we extrapolate outwards and unravel all of those relationships in a larger scale? Mm-hmm.
I would also have a short question about Goldsmith.
Yeah.
What kind of background does the university give to you, and what would be the difference if forensic architecture would be like a totally independent research agency? I mean, not only like practically and financially, but for example at court and this kind of.
Well, it's really important for it. We start. So forensic architecture started as an academic project, coming from the Center for Research Architecture that Eyal Weizmann, our director, established. And so it really began with him and a few PhD students who started kind of looking at forensics and the relationship between aesthetics and forensics, which is kind of an interesting and also taboo kind of term. Aesthetics usually don't go well within court, but for us they're very important because we realize the way that matter is aestheticized to its environment is able to kind of keep traces of the event. And so it started with an ERC grant, a European Research Council grant, that was given to Eyal to establish a new discipline. So the way that it operates now, so because it started as an academic project, it has a whole theoretical backing behind it. And then also, then at some point it became a bit more independent and we became an agency. And so we have researchers that are employed now. But we still, because we are still based at the university, our mandate is to create and disseminate knowledge, new research techniques, new evidentiary techniques. And so it means that we operate in a different way than if we were, let's say, a standalone agency that would just take commissions.
we are subject to, because we have still a European Research Council grant, we are subject to peer review, right? So we have to operate on a higher level of rigorous academic research that is kind of part of the framework of the university. Therefore, it also offers us the legitimacy of a research group within an academic university, rather than, let's say, you know, like a private eye or private, you know, that kind of endeavor. Yeah.
I'm curious about what was the outcome of Tana questioning the copyright and the usage of his...
But nothing, he didn't pursue it. I mean, the video was leaked, it's found in YouTube, and I mean, frankly, you know, I mean, I'm not sure if it is infringement, but even if it was so, that is a much smaller crime than what we're investigating here. He didn't pursue it. He wouldn't pursue it. Yeah.
What could be the consequences for him?
If he pursued, if he sued us.
If the judge will find him guilty, not.
Well, it depends, but there's no judge is even questioning it. That's the whole question. We don't. I mean, we don't really care about him. You know, the question is, why isn't anyone questioning this, right? And why are they covering for him? He talks with the absolute confidence that's yeah, nothing will. He has the backing. So.
What is your relationship with the Turkish community? Is that like?
So the people who commission us, the People's Tribunal also, the People's Tribunal started from this one demonstration, so the family members started also organizing themselves within that. I mean, we met the family, we
engage constantly with them.
Yeah.
I was on another lecture of a guy who investigated the suicide of the two male terrorists, which is also totally unlikely that they could have killed themselves in this way.
Yeah.
Like with rifles, and at the same time, it's like many things in these cases.
Just many things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask you about the nomination of forensic architecture for the Turner Prize, and I understand. I mean, I imagine that's like a huge honor for you as a research group. And do you feel that plays out well in the work that you're doing to be like located within the realm of art? I mean, like, you look it up obviously too with like documents and all these things. But what do you think? How will that develop for
yeah, it's an interesting question, and we have been questioning it a lot. You know, this critique that we're an artist group is going to come more and more now.
Yeah.
So it comes. It's you know, it's a give and take. It comes with a price, right? But at the same time, I think from the beginning we have embraced the fact that, you know, the cultural spaces are actually great forums to be considering the complexity of events such as this. So, you know, we use exhibitions in order to further investigation and to create pressure, such as in the case of Documenta, right? I think there's questions about, so it was funny because at some point in Documenta they were saying, like, it's not art, and then we were criticized that it's only art, and so there's you know, we don't fit in either of them. And now again with the Turner, they say that, you know, like, is it even art, and why does art have to be like this? And so for me, all of this, it's a bit, to be honest, it's a bit irrelevant. That art spaces for me have always been the place where you discuss human rights, where you discuss political kind of realities, and so this is just a step further. You discuss truth, you discuss our role as practitioners within those complex events. So for us, it's the only difference that it makes is that it's no longer that human rights work used to happen within particular human rights places like Amnesty or, you know, Human Rights Watch, Doctors Without Borders, etc. And then an artist would work with them and create some sort of effective product. The only difference here is that the artist is there from the beginning, or the artist is actually working with experts and is considered as an investigator as well, because when you have when you have evidence such as video, the best person who knows how video works and can understand the fact that there's a frame rate and there might be information that is missing because it's between the 24th and the 25th frame of the second, right? That is a filmmaker, right? Because those are the people who are experts in their own kind. So when we have to deal with evidence as media, we realize that, you know, artists are also the experts within that field. They become investigators. So that's the only difference for us. We're a bit worried of what it would mean, but at the same time, I mean, it's too late for us anyway. We're already contaminated as artists, and at least I hope, the only thing that I hope that happens within this is that the forum is expanded within this because, you know, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is kind of create new techniques, give it to other people, so other people can start working like this as well, and also give voice to those who have been silenced. And so, you know, that's all we can hope for. So that scene, I hope, helps that.